Today I want to show you an example of using the matrix method. This is problem 13A from the Crossing the River with Dogs book, paying the bills. So the problem lays out 4 different girls: Kathleen, Ginny, Rosita, and Michelle. It says that each girl has a favorite activity: scuba diving, swimming, rock climbing, and snorkeling, and that all the college friends have a different biggest monthly bill, either apartment, car, clothes, or dorm. So we know we have 4 different people, 4 different activities, and 4 different monthly payments. So we're going to use a matrix method to organize our logic because we have so many different moving components. So I went ahead and I drew the matrix. These are the girls, these are the monthly payments, here's the activities, and here's more monthly payments. So we're going to start off looking at the clues individually. We're going to look at clue number 1. That says, neither the person who likes snorkeling, the person whose biggest bill is her apartment rent, nor Kathleen knew one another before college. So since these are different people, we know that Kathleen can't be the person with whose biggest bill is her apartment rent or the snorkeler. So we're going to go to Kathleen, cross off snorkeling and apartment rent for clue number 1. Clue number 2 says Ginny and the person who make dorm payments have been friends since high school. So we know these are 2 different people. So Ginny cannot be the person who makes dorm payments. So we're going to cross off dorm for Ginny. Now, clue number 3 says Michelle walks most places because she doesn't have a license, and that Ginny's grandfather bought her car for her. So we're going to assume, since Michelle doesn't have a license, that she's not paying for a car. So we're going to cross off Michelle and car. And also, since Ginny's grandfather bought her car for her, we're going to assume Ginny does not make car payments since her grandfather paid her car bill for her. So we're going to cross off car and Ginny. Alright, moving on to clue number 4. Rosita left the dorms for good last year after she almost went crazy. So Rosita, since she left the dorm, she is not making a dorm payment. So Rosita, we're going to cross off dorm. Clue number 5 says Rosita and the rock climber keep their clothing expenses to a minimum by making most of their own clothes. So Rosita and the rock climber are 2 different people. So Rosita cannot be the rock climber. So we're going to cross off rock climbing. Also, since Rosita and the rock climber keep their clothes expenses to a minimum, we're going to assume Rosita highest payment is not clothing. And also, since the rock climber is the same way, we're going to cross off rock climber and clothing too. Okay, moving on to clue number 6. The person whose biggest bill was the apartment rent practiced her activity in the Caribbean Sea last summer. That means that the apartment person cannot be a rock climber because you cannot rock climb in the middle of the sea, hypothetically, if you think about it. Okay. And then clue number 7, the person whose biggest bill is for the clothing. The swimmer and Kathleen went to football playoffs together. So Kathleen cannot be the swimmer or have the biggest bill of clothing. So we're going to cross off, swimming and clothing for Kathleen. And the final clue is the swimmer, the snorkeler, and Rosita all went to an opera together. That means that Rosita cannot be the swimmer or the snorkeler. So we're going to cross off swimmer and snorkeler. now that we've gotten rid of these 3 options for Rosita, we can conclude that Rosita is the scuba diver, or her favorite activity is scuba diving. So Michelle cannot have a favorite activity of scuba diving, neither can Ginny or Kathleen. Since we do that, we can say Kathleen's only option left is for her favorite activity, rock climbing. So we can cross off those for Ginny and Michelle. Unfortunately, we don't know if it's Ginny is swimming or snorkeling. So we're going to pay attention to the expenses now. So the question tells you to assume that Kathleen, the highest bill is the dorm payment, but we're going to assume that it's the car because I've done where we assume Kathleen's highest payment is the dorm, and it leads to a bunch of contradictions. So we're going to assume the car just to make this video a little bit shorter and to get you to the solution. So if we assume that Kathleen's biggest payment, I'm going to write assume here. If we assume Kathleen's biggest payment is the car, then it can't be the dorm, and also Rosita's cannot be the car. Since we already determined that hers can't be the dorm, the clothes, and now it can't be the car, she has to have the biggest payment for the apartment. So we're going to cross off apartment for Ginny and Michelle. The only option left for Ginny is clothes then. And then the only option left for Michelle, the only option left for Michelle is the dorm. So now that we have established that, we're going to go back and look at the questions and write the names next to the people and what they are. So we don't know who the snorkeler is yet, but we do know the person whose biggest bill is her apartment rent is Rosita. We also know that the person who makes dorm payments is Michelle. Since we know Ginny and Michelle were friends in high school, we still don't know who the snorkeler is, so we can't do anything with those clues yet. So we're going to go down. We know the rock climber is Kathleen. So that checks out. The biggest bill for the apartment was Rosita. Rosita scuba dive, which is something she could do in the Caribbean Sea, so that one checks out. The person whose biggest bill is for clothing we deemed was Ginny. So Ginny can no longer be the swimmer because these are different people. So since we don't have a swimmer yet, and Kathleen and Rosita already have positions, Michelle has to be the swimmer. That makes Ginny have to be the snorkeler. So we have an educated guess on what these are, but we're going to go through each clue and check them to make sure we're right. So now our snorkeler is, our snorkeler is Ginny. So Ginny, Rosita, and Kathleen did not know each other before college. Okay. Ginny and Michelle knew each other before college. That checks out because Michelle is not part of the people who did not know each other before college. So these check out with each other and with themselves. So this one's good because Michelle, we decided, is not making a car payment, and neither is Ginny. Rosita left the dorm. She is not making the dorm payment. We're good there. Rosita and Kathleen, who is a rock climber, do not have clothing as their biggest expense, so that's good. And we said Rosita does scuba diving, which makes sense as a Caribbean activity. Ginny, and we decided the swimmer was Michelle. Ginny, Michelle, and Kathleen are all different people. That's good. And then we have the swimmer, who is Michelle again. And the snorkeler, who we determined is Ginny. and Rosita are all different people, so that checks out as well. So all 8 facts check out. If you do the dorm, you'll see that it doesn't quite work out. But so in the end, we have Kathleen, whose favorite activity is rock climbing and whose biggest expense is the car. Ginny, whose favorite activity is snorkeling and whose biggest expense is clothes. Rosita, whose favorite activity is scuba diving and whose biggest expense is her apartment. And Michelle, whose favorite activity is swimming and whose biggest expense is the dorm.